Welcome back, whole 9 yards on a Tuesday afternoon. It's 12:26 Eastern here. Brandon, how's it going?
Good. Yeah. Nothing's really going on. So yeah, everything's good.
So today we got a little bit of a special episode. The podcast has now officially been going on long enough that we can start to react to some of our own takes. Pretty interesting. We'll just start. So we're going to react to our NBA takes. It's an episode from 4 months ago. Um, it's one of our, I think it might have been our first video or first episode with video. It was like a 2 hour, 11-minute episode. We can, I'll link it in the description if you want to take a look at it. I think our content's probably improved at least slightly now, but we'll get into it. We'll just start with the West. So I guess reacting to my one seed, I had the Nuggets as the one seed. I think the sentiment was right. I basically said, Jokic is gonna have to go crazy, and I think we'll eventually talk about it. But I mean, he did. Obviously, Jamal Murray went out. We talked about MPJ. I think we both were high on MPJ, and I think MPJ proves that. Yeah, I mean, he's not going to win Most Improved Player, but he was a guy that he'll be in people's top five if there's a top five for it. He'd be in that top five, maybe even that top three. So I think the sentiment was right. Obviously, they didn't end up being the number one seed, but I mean, Jokic is probably going to win MVP. We don't really have to, hide that until our MVP segment. They're still the three seed. They're only what 5.5 or 5 games back on the Jazz. So I mean, it was not my worst prediction. I'll say that.
Yeah, I also had the Nuggets as my one seed, and yeah, I think we were both thinking the same thing when we made our list. And it was that based off last year, what they did in the bubble. I guess we possibly could have seen that because some fatigue. I mean, they did make the Western Conference Finals. That means they were playing in September. So I guess there was some fatigue. So I guess we could have looked into that, but still, Jokic, I think we thought was going to improve. I don't think we thought he was going to win MVP, but I think we thought he would have been top five. And we'll get into it later, but it looks like he will win MVP. But obviously Murray, you think would improve. You think he'd be an All Star. He wasn't even an All Star this year, so that was pretty disappointing. He did get better before he got injured. He was improving, but like you said, he did get injured. And the Nuggets have actually played better since he got injured. But I think you'd still rather have Murray on your team than not. Porter did improve. I mean, he's averaging 19 a game, so he definitely did get better. He's not going to win most improved, but he definitely is in the conversation. And yeah, this was definitely a team I think most people probably had as their one seed. And I guess we'll get into the other teams that did get better, but the Jazz and the Suns are the 1 and 2, and I don't think most people had them as their 1 and 2. I think people had them between 5 and probably 9, I would say, in the West. So that's clearly a surprise there. So I think there was just a couple teams that were more surprising and just performed better than the Nuggets, but I think the prediction was I would still stand by and say it was a pretty good prediction.
Right. For the rest of the West, actually, I mean, I was thinking actually I should just go through like the current standings and we can both react to that rather than both of us saying my two seed, my three seed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So, our both of our one seeds were the Nuggets, and that was the three seed. But looking at the actual Western Conference standings, how they actually turned out, the Jazz were the number one seed, 52-20. I had the Jazz as definitely not the one seed. I had them as the one, two, three, four, five, six. I had them as the seventh seed. So I had them in the play-in tournament. I mean, Brandon, where'd you have them? Reactions to their season,
I had
outstanding
the Jazz.
players.
Yeah, I had the Jazz as my sixth seed. And I guess I mean, obviously, like you said, they're the number one seed, which I didn't think they'd be. You know, they're just a team that didn't seem like they're basically the same team they were last year, and where I forget where they ended up last year, but I think they played the Nuggets in the first round. So what were they, the five seed? I think they were last year. So I didn't really see them being, maybe they're even the sixth seed actually last year, but I didn't really see them being a one seed this year. I think they went on that stretch where they were like 24-2 or something like that. That obviously helped. I mean, without that, they're definitely not the one seed. So I think it was, they're clearly a team that relies on team basketball. I mean, Mitchell is clearly their best player, but he's also been injured last month, and they've still been playing pretty well. But they're when your best player is Donovan Mitchell, you don't really have a true star. I think he's an all-star, but I don't think he's a top 20 guy, or at least a top 15 guy. A guy you could put on any team, you can make them a lot better. I don't think he's that guy. But yeah, I think they're definitely surprised probably everyone. I don't think anyone thought they'd win over 50 games this year. But yeah, I think this is a team where, and we'll get into the playoffs, I guess, a little bit later, but this is a team that is more of a regular season team than a playoff team, I would say.
Yeah, I had them as I had them basically in the plan. Definitely didn't expect them to be the one seed. Outstanding players. I mean, I think this team's honestly kind of how I don't think I was completely wrong on this team. Obviously, record wise, yes, but in terms of playoff outcome, I don't think I'm gonna be completely wrong. I don't see this team going super far. If they had to play the Lakers in the first round, I'm picking the Lakers. I mean, I don't care. I'm picking the Lakers to win in the first round. If they had to play the Warriors in the first round, I'd consider picking the Warriors. And I know the Warriors are not nearly as good of a basketball team, but Jazz versus Warriors, who has the best player in that series? The Warriors do. And in basketball, the team with the best player won't always win the series, but most of the time they do. And I'm not saying that the Jazz shouldn't be favored in that series, but if it's Jazz versus Warriors and the Warriors have the best player, that's a tough series for the Jazz. They're probably going to get a rough break, I would assume, unless they can play the Grizzlies or the Spurs in the first round. They're going to have a tough break. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to be completely wrong on this Jazz team. They could have the same result as a 7 seed, and that's out in the first round. So, looking at the 2 seed, this was probably a top 2 or 3 surprise of the league. It was the Suns. They went 51-21, only 1 game back of the first seed. They probably would have been the first seed if it wasn't for the Jazz's like you said, 24-2 streak there. I mean, I had them as, I want to say, the 9 seed. I think the 9 seed, 7, 8, yeah, I had them as the 9 seed. So I had them in the plan. I think you had them somewhere similar, maybe the 8 or the 10. Chris Paul basically just transformed this team much more than I think people thought that he would. Now we'll see if that translates into playoff success. Chris Paul kind of has yet to really, super succeed in the playoffs. He's done well. He's made it to a conference finals, but he has yet to make it to an NBA finals. This team is less talented than some other teams in the West, and I think they'd even be, the Suns would admit it as well. The Lakers are probably more talented. The Clippers have more top end talent. It's going to be interesting to see how they play in the playoffs, but yeah, I mean, they were super surprising for me. I had them as, the 9 seed. So
Yeah, I also had as my 9 seed. I did have them as technically the 8 seed, in the playing tournament. I did have them winning that 9-10 game and then winning against the loser of the 7-8 game. But I guess for the end of the regular season, I did have them as my 9 seed. So yeah, definitely surprising. I thought this was a team, before the season, I think I said, like, you get Paul, which obviously is going to help your team, but I just didn't exactly see this team being a top 4 seed in the West. Booker, he's always been a good stats but bad team guy, and I don't know if that's his fault or not, because the team around him just wasn't great, but that's just what he's been throughout his career. It's already been 6 years, 5 years in the league for him. So that's kind of the narrative that was on him. Paul, he had a great year last year, but another year, he's 35. You just don't know. He always has an injury history. Last year he didn't get injured. This year he didn't get injured. So 2 free injury years, which is pretty impressive considering, the last 7 years he's basically been injured every single year. So that was something that wasn't expected from them. Also, just Monty Williams. I mean, he looks like he's going to win Coach of the Year. He did a great job with his team. The role players, like the role, like Mikal Bridges stepping up. Jay Crowder was a good addition in the offseason. They just had really good complementary pieces along with Booker and Paul. So I think people kind of saw them similar to us, 7, 8, 9. I think people probably had them as, and for them to be a 2 seed in the West. I mean, again, people probably thought the Lakers and the Clippers wouldn't be as good as last year, just because, stars, obviously long run for the Lakers, Kawhi and PG, injury, resting, that was kind of expected from them anyways. So I don't think people thought them being a top 4 seed, especially not 2, but definitely surprising from them. But again, their first round matchup, which could be the Lakers, I could definitely see them losing in the first round. If they had to play the Lakers, I could definitely see them losing to them.
yeah, if they had to play the Lakers in round 1, I'd pick the Lakers.
Yeah,
Uh, The 3 seed we talked about at Denver. We already talked about how they're, yeah, I'll skip it. The Clippers, they were the 4 seed in real life. They went 47-25, tied with Denver for the 3 seed. Didn't have the tiebreaker, but I had the Clippers as my 3 seed. Um, so I mean, pretty close, pretty close. They were basically tied for the 3 seed. They were kind of what I expected this year. Maybe I expected them to be slightly better, but I think Kawhi was probably a little bit worse than I expected, and Paul George was probably a little bit better. The addition of Rajon Rondo completely kind of transformed the mentality and the way this team looked just on the court. And statistically, I guess they, like points per game wise, they didn't really change too much, in terms of individual statistics, but you saw it on, in the win-loss category, and just watching the team, they looked completely different. I think Rondo kind of gave this team a veteran leadership that I guess Kawhi and Paul George just kind of lack as players. That's just not their style. They're not like the alpha male in the locker room, and that's not a negative necessarily, because in a lot of NBA locker rooms, there's just too many of those guys. Whether it be, LeBron and Kyrie on that Cavs team, they are both kind of alpha males, until Kyrie, eventually wanted out. Even looking at that Warriors team, KD, Steph, I mean, those are both kind of like alpha males or whatever guys that, kind of they wanted to be their team. So it's not necessarily a negative, but yeah, I mean, I had the Clippers as my I had them as my 3. They were the 4. Pretty similar to how I thought things would play out. So
Yeah, I had them as my 2 seed. And like you said, they finished as the 4 seed, but could have been the 3 seed. They had the same record as the Nuggets. And they basically forfeited the last 2 games of the season by sitting George and Leonard. So they most likely would have been the 3 seed. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you on, Kawhi definitely wasn't as good as maybe we thought. I think he was just average. He just did what he did and didn't really do anything spectacular. George was definitely better, even with some injuries that he had, and still some slumps in there, but he was definitely better than last season, especially the playoffs, obviously. But I think as a team, I want to say that they were the best 3-point shooting team of all time in terms of percentage wise throughout the whole team. It was over 40%, or it was around 40%, something like that. I think they had 5 or 6 guys shoot over 40% from three. So they're a much improved 3-point shooting team. Overall as a team, which is huge because obviously in the playoffs, 3-point shooting is going to play a factor. They're still a pretty good defensive team. Obviously, when you have George, Leonard, Rondo, Pat Bev, if he ever can get on the court, so they're still pretty good defensively. And yeah, this it's kind of what I expected them to be. I had them as the 2 seed. Again, with the Utah, Phoenix surprising teams as the 1 and 2. I think the Clippers probably would have been a 2 seed if you don't have a team like a Utah or Phoenix. But yeah, pretty similar to what I thought, and I think we both agreed on them. A team that's going to be top 4 in the West anyways, and at least second round, depending on seeding. They're not going to have to face the Lakers in the second round, so they could potentially get to that Western Conference Finals without having to face the Lakers. But yeah, I think pretty similar to what we thought before the season started.
the 5th seed with the Mavericks, I had them as my 4 seed. I thought they'd be a little bit better. I mean, we both talked about it in that podcast that I said at least that they could be potentially even better than the 4 seed, which I had them predicted at. I wanted to slot them even higher. I just couldn't find the room with the Nuggets, Lakers, and Clippers. I think out the gate, Luca was slightly worse than I anticipated. Probably, honestly, not even slightly. He was just worse than I anticipated. The 3-point percentage was down a lot, and he just wasn't looking like an MVP candidate. But after that, like initial start to the year, they kind of started to pick it up a lot more. They were a team that wasn't even in the playoffs to really start the year. And then they kind of started to slowly creep up, and eventually they got back to the 5 seed, which is kind of where we thought they'd be. But yeah, I mean, Kristaps is still a question mark. I think their whole team is kind of still a question mark in my mind. I think I can. I mean, the Seth Curry trade was probably a lose for them. I think Seth Curry's been amazing for the Sixers, and if you could do that trade back again, I don't think you do it if you're the Mavericks. I there's no way you would. But yeah, Luca is still he's going to be a top 5 guy in the league soon if he isn't already, and he's going to be that for the next probably 12 to 15 years. So Yeah, I mean, I think the Mavericks are going to compete with the Clippers in the first round. I don't think they're going to win, but I think they'll compete just like they did last year, maybe even slightly more so. Maybe they push it 7. Who knows? Um, but yeah, I think I was pretty close in the Mavs, other than the start of the year.
Yeah, I also had them as my 4 seed, and they started the year 8-12, but since then they went 34-18. I think that's more the team that we thought would be there, not the team that started 8-12, and it was clearly because Luca wasn't in shape. He just wasn't even close to the same player he was the year before. And then as the season went on, he got more in shape and just got better, and he turned into that MVP candidate. But obviously, it was just too late, in the season with all the other guys in their seasons. But yeah, this is the team that I think we thought was going to be there. They finished 42-30. Again, if you take that start from the season, I think they'd probably have 45 wins at the minimum, I would say, which would, I guess, still be the 5 seed. But I think they'd be competing more for that 3-4 seed if they started off better. Kristaps is definitely still a question mark. Sometimes it looks like they're better with him off the court. He obviously brings spacing, but he's not really that defensive presence anymore like he was in New York. He's not a great rebounder. Obviously, he's tall and skinny, so he's not going to be able to box guys out in the paint. His shooting still really isn't there, honestly. It just seems like he's in and out of games. He's in the offense, and he goes 5 minutes without even touching the ball. Stuff like that. So it's something they're definitely have to work out for the playoffs. Obviously, you only have a couple days till the playoff starts, but that's clearly their biggest question mark. I'm not really worried about Luca. Their outside shooting, I think they're still one of the best offensive rated teams in the league. Last year, they set the record. I think this year is either them or someone else who set the record again. So clearly, that's not really a problem for them. But yeah, it's going to be all in Luca in this first round playoffs against the Clippers. And yeah, I probably have the Clippers winning, but I think last year went 6. Obviously, by that buzzer beater by Luca, that's why. But I think this one could be way more competitive. Even if it's still 6 games, I think it'll be a better 6 games than it was last year.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think if Luca's the best player by a fair margin in this series, which I think he could be, just because he's on a team by himself, Kawhi and George aren't. So I think, Doncic has room to be that best player in the series. If he can be that, this series can be really competitive. I don't see the Mavs winning unless the Clippers choke like they did last year, which, may happen. But yeah, the 6th seed in real life was the Blazers. They were tied with the Mavs for the 5th seed, 42-30. I had them as my 5 seed. I was a lot higher on them than you were. At least that's what I remember at least. Um, Dame was great. McCollum was great off the start, got injured. Still had a great year. McCollum was better than even I probably expected he would be. I'm a guy that would probably like to trade McCollum at some point. Um, yeah, Dame's just a baller. He's probably the second best point guard in the league. Obviously Curry being number 1. Yeah, I think this team's kind of where I thought they'd be. But yeah, I don't really have too much to say on them.
Yeah, I had them as my 8 seed, and then I had them losing to the Suns, at least in our pre-predictions. So I actually had them missing the playoffs after the play-in tournament. But yeah, the team definitely overperformed. And clearly with their injuries early in the season, I thought they'd be tanked. I mean, even though you still had Lillard, McCollum was out, Nurkic was out. You were missing guys. Obviously, they traded Trent for Powell, which, I think they probably wouldn't want to do that again. Obviously, Trent's really been a lot better with the Raptors. And Powell's going to be a free agent, which they're not going to pay. So I don't think they would have done that again. But yeah, this is a team where he was really good this year. I mean, obviously, he was a lot better even than what the stats say he was. I think he was still 29-7 a game, but he was just better than that. To lead a team without, your second and third best players, still be 6th in the West, 42-30. Again, could have been 5th. They lost that tiebreaker to the Mavs. So definitely a really impressive season, not only from Blazers, but from Lillard. But again, their defense is the biggest key for them. It's definitely the scariest part. They're allowing 114 points a game, which is out of the teams that made the playoffs in the West, it's the worst. Even the teams that made the play-in tournament, it's the worst by 2 points at the minimum. So that's the biggest thing. And in that first round against the Nuggets, I don't think it's really going to be a close series. I mean, last time they played in the playoffs, the Blazers did win in 7, but 2 completely different teams 2 years later than they were what they were when the Nuggets played them in that second round 2019. So I think the Nuggets will win this series, but the Blazers definitely a really impressive season though.
Yeah, no, definitely. 7 seed is the Lakers, a pretty surprising overall result. Came down to basically injuries. I mean, when you don't have LeBron and AD for a solid amount of the season, or you have one playing and not the other, this team's clearly just not as good. And I think they need both of them at least a certain percentage of 100% to. They both need to be on the court for them to win series. Um, we'll see how the plan shakes out. I would be really, really surprised if somehow they didn't make it into the playoffs. Even if they lose to the Warriors, are they really going to lose to either the Grizzlies or the Spurs? I don't think so. Um, I don't think I was horribly wrong on this team either. I mean, they're only 9 games out of the 2 seed, which is a fair amount, but they also lost LeBron and AD for a solid amount of the season. If they don't have that, I think they're competing for that 2 seed. I don't know that they get it. I think they're probably around that 3 to 4 seed where the Clippers are, but still, I think this is a pretty solid team. And if you're telling me this team gets into the playoffs, I'm picking them to win I'm picking them to win the championship probably. So.
Yeah, I had them as my 3 seed in the West, and LeBron and AD, I think they both missed 30 games. Maybe it was 28 and 30 games each. So for them, for your two best players and two arguably top 7 players in the NBA, to miss that amount of games with a team where your next best player is Schroeder, Kuzma, Harrell. It's nothing amazing, but it's still a good enough team to win games. And they still win 42 and 30. So if LeBron and AD, let's say they only miss 12 to 15 games, I think this team is up there with the Nuggets and the Clippers at 47 wins. I mean, that's a 5-win difference. I think LeBron and AD could even be more. They could even get to 50 wins, honestly, if they missed half of those games that they missed. So, yeah, I don't think we were wrong. I think obviously just injuries just played the biggest factor in them being the 7 seed right now. And without those injuries, I think they're clearly a top 4 team in the West. No matter what the record would be, they'd be the number 1 team in the West, obviously, when it comes to the playoffs. But yeah, I think honestly, them being a 7 seed, I think it still works out because I think they're better than Phoenix. Their front line is better than Phoenix's front line. I think Phoenix gonna have a big problem with that in that first round, assuming the Lakers beat the Warriors, which definitely a possibility the Warriors could win. If Curry goes crazy, but I think most people have the Lakers winning that. And then, yeah, I think it just works out for them, honestly, in this playoffs with them being the 7 seed. So, yeah, I think it's not the worst thing possible, considering if you were to tell the Lakers that LeBron and AD would miss 30 games each, and you're probably set up about as good as you could be going into the playoffs. I think people would not. I don't think they'd be. I think they'd find that crazy. That they'd probably be in a pretty good shape with them being a 7 seed right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. At the 8 seed, at the 8 seed, there were the Warriors. I had them as my 6 seed. I was probably a little bit higher on them than you were. I think you probably had them around the 8. Um, yeah, I mean, Steph, he averaged like 32, 5, and 5 this year. He went absolutely ham. If it weren't for Jokic, there's a solid chance he wins MVP. I guess if it weren't for Jokic and Embiid, maybe he even would win it over Embiid. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, he had an insane year. Not too much help around him. I think Draymond was better than I expected. Even though I guess I had them better than they ended up being. Draymond kind of had a little bit of a career revival. Offensively, not nearly the same, but he was a guy that if it weren't for Gobert and Simmons, he's in that Defensive Player of the Year conversation. So to me, that's sort of a career revival for him, at least compared to last year when he basically looked like he was a guy that who really cares about him at all. But yeah, I think there's just not much help around Curry. Curry has to basically be the MVP of the league for them to beat the Lakers. He'll have to be the best player in that game for them to win, which is possible. I'm not going to predict it, but I think Curry gives him a chance in almost any series. Not a great chance, but a puncher's chance, a Hail Mary chance. If Curry just goes off in a series and for 6 games or for 7 games, he can average 35 points on, or maybe even more than 35 on 50% from 3. I mean, that's a tough series to win if he's going to be so dominant. But again, that's tough to predict. But yeah, Warriors the 8 seed.
Yeah, I had them as my 7 seed when we did our predictions, and yeah, I think they finished. I mean, they finished as the 8 seed, but I think I was pretty spot on with it. It was Curry was going to average 30 plus points a game, and you were gonna have to hope. Now, obviously, Oubre hasn't worked out at all. I thought he'd be a lot better than he's been. But you were hoping that Oubre, Wiggins would give you 15 to 17 points a game, maybe even more than that. I guess Wiggins like 20 points per game. But those guys would be at least solid second and third options, and at least, not trustworthy, but at least trusted enough to take, to make shots and take shots on their own. But that's just not been the case. Draymond's been a lot better, like you said. I mean, he's averaging 9 assists. He's probably a top 5 defensive player of the year candidate. He'll probably make first team all defense. I'd be surprised if he didn't. But yeah, I think this team is probably exactly where most people thought they'd be, and where it's Curry. Basically, if Curry doesn't have a good game, they're probably not winning, and they'll win against good teams if he goes off, and against the average teams, as long as he plays good enough, they'll most likely win. So I think I think most people have them here between that 8, probably 7, I guess 7 and 10 range. I think people probably didn't think they'd be a 10 seed, but yeah, I think this was pretty spot on for them.
Yeah, the Grizzlies were the 9 seed. I had them as my 8 seed. I think you might have them missing the playoffs, if I recall. I'm not exactly too sure, but
Yeah.
I think this Grizzlies team, it looks like at the beginning they weren't going to make the playoffs. They had injuries. That Triple J was injured, Jaw was injured. I think they might even add more injuries, but I mean this Grizzlies team, the Grizzlies in general are a team that just tend to overachieve and overperform. Jaw's just, I mean, he's going to be the second best player from that 2019 draft class. There's a reason he won Rookie of the Year. He's a great player. He's not Zion, but he's a super athletic point guard who can play make. He can kind of do everything, and I'm excited to see his development. Yeah, I mean, I think this team's around where I thought they would be. Maybe I was a little bit higher on them than most, and I was probably still too high on them. I mean, at least 1 seed too high. But yeah, what are your reactions from the Grizzlies at the 9 seed?
Yeah, I didn't even have them in my top 10. I thought this team would be, obviously they overperformed last year with Ja, and I thought this year they'd underperform. Not even underperform, I just thought they'd regress. Not more so because of their team, but more so the other teams in the West. Obviously, you had the Warriors, who were one of the worst teams in the league last year. Obviously, that wasn't going to be the case. And then just the West as a whole was going to be better. You thought New Orleans could possibly be better, but that wasn't the case. But even still, there were just other teams that I thought would be better than Memphis. So for them to be a 9 seed, and they even could have been the 8 seed, it came down to the last game of the regular season. I think it's really impressive for them. You're right, Ja definitely. He had that ankle injury that was like 10 games into the season, and it looked like he was going to be out for at least a month or two. He came back in like 3 weeks, which was crazy that he even came back that fast. It was like a high ankle sprain. And he was really good this year. Jaren Jackson Jr. only played 11 games. Not much of a factor, obviously, from coming back from that injury, which is a whole different situation with that team. But yeah, I mean, obviously, are they even going to make the playoffs? Probably not. Even if they beat the Spurs, if they have to play the Warriors, I don't think they're going to win. Obviously, if they have to play the Lakers, they're not going to win. So yeah, this is a team that definitely needs improvements. I don't know if Ja can be your best player on that team. I mean, he might have to be because you're the Grizzlies and you're not going to have free agent attractions, but I definitely doubt his ability to be a true number one on a playoff team, especially in the West. It's going to be very hard in the West in the next couple of years. So obviously the Pelicans will be better. Minnesota, could they be better? Possibly. I don't know. Their defense is always terrible. You're still going to have the Lakers, still going to have the Warriors at least for a couple of years. The Mavericks are only going to get better. Nuggets going to get better. So it's definitely going to be tough for the West and the Grizzlies. But for at least for this season, yeah, they definitely were better than what I thought at least.
Yeah, sitting at the 10 seed were the Spurs. I did not have the Spurs in my playoffs. I think for the most part, it comes down to just Popovich is really good. DeMar has been better than I thought he'd be. Not necessarily. I mean, he's a guy that he put up 21.6 points per game this season. So he's a guy that produces, but I mean, he's not a guy. He's not even a top 4 player probably on a championship winning team. He might be the 4th at best, but that's kind of pushing it to me. DeJounte Murray is kind of a lockdown defensive guy. I'm not sure how Spurs fans particularly feel about him and his development, but yeah, I mean, this is a team that performed better than I thought they would. But I mean, by no means were they a great team. On what they were 33 and 39, right? So, I mean, yeah, I had the Pelicans squeezing in there and kind of taking that spot, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have the Spurs in my top 10. I had the Pelicans, like you said, as my 10 seed. They were terrible this year, and the Spurs, even though they weren't that good, they were just better than the Pelicans were. And I do credit that to Popovich because this team really shouldn't be close to the playoffs. I mean, your best player is DeRozan, and this isn't 2015, 2016 where he averaged 27 points a game. He's not that DeRozan anymore. Your next best players, Murray, Derek White, Keldon Johnson. That's not a top four on any playoff team. So it's pretty remarkable that they're even a 10 seed, honestly. Does anyone expect them to even make the playoffs? No. But for them to be in this situation, yeah, I think that's all coaching. It's all culture by Popovich. And it's honestly one of his better coaching jobs the last, however he's been there. And, this should not be a playoff team. Any other coach on this team, maybe one or two coaches could make a 9-10 seed in the West, but I don't really think there even is. I think Popovich is probably the only coach that can make this team a playoff team, at least a play-in team. So
Yeah, definitely. But I guess we'll look at the East. I'll let you lead things. So I guess we'll just start with the 1 seed.
yeah, so the 1 seed in real life is the Sixers at 49-23. For me, I had the Bucks being the 1 seed. I mean, they were 46-26, so only 3 games behind. So not it wasn't terrible, but they definitely didn't perform like I thought they would. They were definitely really good this year. They were honestly probably, at least by the numbers wise, they were probably better than they were the last 2 years. But for some reason, they just never. It seemed like in the beginning of the season, they just kept losing games and they didn't have maybe a great chemistry. Drew Holiday wasn't playing great in the beginning. He played a lot better in the middle of the season and towards the end of the season. And Giannis played way better towards the end too. If he hadn't won the last 2 MVPs, Giannis could easily win MVP this year too. But obviously that wasn't going to happen with him winning the last two. But yeah, this is a team where, I definitely thought they'd be better in the regular season, and we'll see what happens in the playoffs. They have to play Miami in the first round, which is probably the toughest matchup that they could have asked for out of any of the teams. So I guess we'll see what happens in the playoffs. But at least for the regular season, I thought they'd be a little bit better. But 46-26, you can't really be mad at that. So I think it was a pretty good prediction, I would say.
Yeah, I had the Bucks as the 1 seed as well. I mean, I think you summarized it pretty well. Holiday wasn't as great off the bat, but he's turned into a guy that, again, if it weren't for Simmons and Gobert, he's a guy that could slip into that Defensive Player of the Year talk. He's an honorable mention type of guy when it comes to that award. But yeah, I mean, I think this team played slightly worse than I thought they were going to. I thought they were probably going to hit 50 wins. They didn't. So yeah, I mean, but still, I think this team's similar to how I think they kind of were to start the year, but I kind of like this team at the 3 seed. I think the pressure's not completely on them anymore. It's been a couple years now. I think it's time for them to compete. And I don't think the spotlight's on them as much as it used to be with the Nets, the Sixers, even the Knicks to a certain extent. Not that the Knicks compete with them, but the Knicks are there, which kind of helps take the spotlight off the Bucks a little bit. So I'm excited to see how they play in the playoffs. Maybe it's just going to be the same thing again, but we'll see.
Yeah, if they were playing in a different team that first round, I definitely have more confidence in them. But for them to play Miami, they even get by them, they have to play the Nets. That's a very tough 2 first rounds, and I'd be surprised if they make it out. Definitely the second round, but even the first round. I mean, if they make it out against the Heat, I'd be impressed by that. But again, then you have to play the Nets, so definitely a tough playoffs for them. But speaking of the Nets, they were the 2 seed in real life. I had them as the 2 seed for me also. This is kind of what I thought, and this is before they got Harden. Obviously, this is just based off KD and Kyrie being on the team. I thought they'd be a 2 seed. They'd be really good offensively. Defensively, they wouldn't be great. Obviously, they still aren't great defensively. Obviously after trading Allen, Levert, getting Harden, they're still not great, which I don't think anyone expected them to be. But yeah, I mean, them three, they haven't been healthy all year. They've only played, I guess, now 10 games together, I think it is, maybe 9 or 11 games. But I think everyone knows them three on the court, as long as they're 90% healthy, they're better than any other three on any other team. So yeah, I'm definitely scared to play them. Like I was just saying, the Bucks, I'd be scared to play them in the second round. And it does look like Philly's probably going to get the Eastern Conference final spot. So it's probably going to be the Nets and the Sixers, at least in my mind. I don't know about you, but if it is, that's going to be a great series. It'll be so interesting to see how they plan against Embiid, how they do offensively, the Nets. So yeah, this is kind of what I expected, 2 seed for the Nets.
Yeah, I had the Raptors as my 2 seed, so pretty. I mean, I think they played out how I thought they would. The Raptors have been pretty solid all year. Obviously, no.
I mean,
Well,
just flip the record around, right?
yeah, flip the record. If they were 45 and 27, that would be how I thought they would have played. But they missed the playoffs entirely, which honestly, I'm still even, I don't even, not even considering that I had them at the 2 seed. That's still an underperformance that people thought they were going to be. Yeah, they just didn't play well. I mean, I think they just not only did they lose Ibaka and Gasol, but they also just weren't nearly as good in general. So I still think Nick Nurse is a top what something amount. He's a top coach in the league, but yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, it's a bad prediction, but it happens, I guess.
Yeah, and I will say for the West, I did have the Rockets as my 5 seed. Obviously, we just never talked about them because they were the worst team in the league, I think, right? So that was my bad prediction for this, and yours with the Raptors. So we both had one, at least in each conference. But moving on to the 3 seed, the Bucks were the 3 seed in real life, 46 and 26, like we said. I had the Sixers there, so you just flip flop them. The 1 and 3, which I definitely could have seen before the season started. Obviously with the Sixers, having a new coach and everything, new culture there. But the Bucks, yeah, we kind of talked about them a little bit. Yeah, they are a team that I think just their stats wise and everything, they looked good, but they just haven't looked. They just weren't winning games. It seemed like in the beginning of the season, but they turned it on. The last 20, 30 games of this season. And again, it's going to be a tough matchup in that first round against the Heat, but you would think they'd learn from last year in the way that they played against them, where they should have got swept. They got gentlemen's swept in 5 games. So I think it'll be definitely a better series this year, especially bubble. Giannis was injured last year. Different injury concerns, different problems. That shouldn't be a problem this year. But again, still a tough series. But them being a 3 seed again, you're right. No pressure. I think that is the biggest thing for them. There's no pressure, at least not being a 1 seed and being the most dominant team in the league. So I think that does help. But again, definitely a tough series.
Yeah, I had the Celtics as my 3 seed. Clearly, just another subpar pick. They were the 7 seed, and they're a team that if they miss the playoffs and lose this play-in tournament, I mean, I wouldn't be like too shocked. I think the only thing I got right about this team was Tatum and Brown. They played about as well as I thought they would have played, but everything else on this team I was wrong about. I was wrong on Brad Stevens being able to coach this team well. I was wrong on the fact that the depth would work out well. I was wrong on Marcus Smart. Evan Fournier was not a good move, clearly. Not that it was a horrible one. I mean, you didn't give up anything. It just wasn't a great move. I think Aaron Gordon probably would have been a better pickup, even though he obviously cost more. Uh, yeah, this team just didn't end up working out. Kemba clearly just not good anymore. I mean, he's all right. He's just not the same Kemba that he used to be in Charlotte or even beginning of Boston, I guess. Um, yeah, it's just team's just not very good. So we'll see what happens to him in the plan, but the 3 seed didn't happen.
Yeah, speaking of Boston, I had them as my 4 seed. That obviously went to the Knicks this year, which again, that's the second most surprising team behind the Suns out in my mind. So that was the next one, 41-31. Again, I had the Celtics there. I was thinking, coming off the Eastern Conference Finals appearance, which they possibly could have lost in that semifinal against the Raptors, but they did make the conference finals last year. Just thinking this year, especially the way, if you look at the stats wise, like Brown played 10 times better than you would have thought that he would have played. He really improved to a true number 2 on that team behind Tatum, which is what you could have hoped for going into the season. And you would expect Kemba to be better, but his knees just gave out, honestly. His knees are almost done, I think you could say. Obviously, coming off that surgery in the offseason, he never was truly healthy to begin the season. He's always had the nagging injuries, can't even play back-to-backs. And then obviously the locker room problems, just, I don't know if it's coaching, culture, the locker room, just the players. I don't know what's going on with them Celtics wise, but clearly a huge problem. But speaking of the Knicks, at least, I mean, neither of us had them making the playoffs, even being in the play-in tournament. So for them to be a 4 seed, obviously getting Coach Tibbs in there, Randall's played like an MVP. He's going to win Most Improved Player. We'll get into that later. But yeah, just them as a whole team getting D Rose as a trade, which everyone thought was a bad trade. Why are you getting Derrick Rose? But he's turned out amazing, and I think they're 10 games over 500 when he plays. So yeah, just a great season by them. If it wasn't for the Suns and Monty Williams winning Coach of the Year, Tibbs would win Coach of the Year. But yeah, still a great season. Them being a 4 seed, no one expected them to be a 4 seed, not even close.
Yeah, to me, this was the most surprising team. I have them as more surprising than the Suns, just because I thought the Suns were still going to make the playoffs or at least compete for a playoff spot. And they're the 2 seed, which is surprising, definitely. But the Knicks, with just so much disarray and dysfunction in the culture, it's just the fact that they're the 4 seed is super surprising. That is not where I thought they were at all. I didn't have them in the play, and I don't think you had him in either. Julius Randle turned in from a guy who he was the seventh pick a while ago, maybe like the 2014 draft ish. I mean,
Yeah.
he looked like a guy that was kind of just not good. Marcus Smart was the pick before him, and it looks like Marcus Smart might have been the better pick, but clearly that's just not right anymore. I mean, he Randall turned in from a guy that you just honestly don't even really want on a team to a guy that's going to be a perennial All Star or perennial All NBA player. Um, he's he's carried this team to the 4 seed, or not necessarily carried, but he's been a huge part of this 4 seed. I think Tibbs has a lot to do with Randall's success, which is why, to me, if I had a vote, I think I'd probably go with Tibbs for Coach of the Year over Monty Williams, especially given the fact that this Knicks organization is just in dysfunction the past 40 years, if maybe less than that, but at least like the past 20 years. Um, so yeah, this team was super surprising to me. Obviously, quickly was a really good draft pick, getting him as low as you did. Uh, RJ Barrett doesn't look like a bust. Maybe he doesn't look as great as people thought he would, but he doesn't look like a bust. But yeah, I mean, as a Knicks fan, I'm sure you're pretty stoked, but yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And if the Suns were a 4 or 5 seed, I could definitely see Tibbs getting Coach of the Year because the expectations were so much lower. Because the Suns definitely were viewed as a playoff team. The Knicks just clearly weren't. But with them being a 2 seed in the West, especially even with the Lakers' injuries concerns and all that, I think it still is maybe a better. I guess I don't know the exact wording of it. I was going to say better achievement, but either way, either both is very impressive. Just for the Knicks to make the playoffs, but then even be a top 4 seed in the East is very impressive. And
And by
moving
the
on
way,
to
I had the Sixers as my 4 seed. I didn't say that, but
okay, so, yeah. So, but moving on to the 5 seed. In real life, it was the Hawks again, 41-31. I had the Heat here; they were the 6 seed, so again, not that much farther off, especially with the Heat beginning. But we'll get into them in the next. We'll talk about the 6 seed. But for the Hawks, I mean, if this team was still coached by Lloyd Pierce, which I mean, obviously it wasn't going to be, but let's say it was, they wouldn't even be close to the 5 seed. They would probably make the playoffs, but they'd probably be in that playing tournament. Definitely, I would say. Firing him and go to Nate McMillan, they're a completely different team. Bogdanovich got used way differently with Nate McMillan. He's more of a ball handler, shooter, which is what he is. I mean, that's just he's a very good shooter. He's over 40% from three. He's a very good scorer. He could handle the ball too. Trae Young isn't the ISO player that he was the last 2 years. He's more of a team guy. He's still averaging the same amount of assists as he was the last 2 years, but if you just watch a Hawks game, you could tell he's a different player than he was. He's averaging less points per game too, which I think is better for him. Their team as a whole is just better. Capella has been really good defensively. He's averaged, he won the rebounding battle, if that means anything anymore. I think he averaged over 2 blocks a game, way better than he was the last couple of years in Houston. Obviously playing under Harden, kind of a similar offense though. I think their team as a whole is just completely way better under Nate McMillan. That's why they're a 5 seed. They're definitely a scary opponent because the way they could shoot the ball and their offense. Obviously, their defense isn't great besides Capella, but yeah, I think just their team as a whole, I think it's a really good, and that firing was clearly the best thing that they could have done for this season.
yeah, no, I agree. I had the Nets as my 5 seed, so again, not a great pick. But looking at the Hawks, yeah, I mean, Trae Young he's changed a little bit. He turned into a guy that would just kind of hog the ball and shoot it into a guy who he's still going to get his points. He's still going to get 25 a night, but he's looking to pass the ball. He's looking to be a playmaker. He's looking to pass and get his teammates open and make people around him actually better, which is huge. You're completely right on Laurie Pierce. He should have been fired long before he was. And Nate McMillan, I mean, not only was he great for the Hawks, but if you're looking at the Pacers and the Pacers are looking at themselves, you're saying, man, I guess I just clearly should not have fired Nate McMillan, or at least I shouldn't have hired who I hired to replace McMillan. There's a reason McMillan's been a head coach in what? I mean, he was on the Seattle Supersonics in the early 2000s. Then he went to the Blazers for several years. the Pacers for a few, and now he's at the Hawks. I don't know if he lands the permanent job. I don't know if they've talked about it at all, the Hawks themselves, but he's at least got a pretty gosh darn good chance to win that permanent job. So good for Nate McMillan, good for this Hawks team. We'll see what happens to John Collins after this year. I'm curious to
Yeah.
see if he's on that team. I don't think so, but I still think this team can be a team that competes for the playoff spots, regardless of if Colin returns or not. So yeah, I mean, I think this team exceeded my expectations. I had them as like a plan team. I think I had them as like the 9 or 8. I can check, but
Yeah, I had them as my 9 seed. I just checked mine too. I did have them making the 8 seed in the play-in, but I did have them finishing as a 9 seed.
yeah, I had them as my 9 seed. So
Yeah, and it's actually funny because McMillan didn't even want to coach this year. He was planning on taking a year off. Lloyd Pierce asked him to be an assistant for him, and he didn't even say yes at the beginning. He said yes towards the end of the offseason, and then he takes his job, and he's over 500 by a wide margin ever since being head coach. So it's a pretty interesting story, and we'll see if he actually does want to be the head coach of this team going forward. Because, like I said, he did want to take some time off from being a coach in the NBA, but still a great story. And definitely a tough matchup in the first round, but I think they definitely can win. They're clearly the better offensive team, but that would be a really good series, I think. But moving on to the 6th seed, it's the Miami Heat. Like I said, for my 6th seed, I had the Raptors there. And I remember when we made this, I didn't even want the Raptors there because I really didn't like them going into the season. I thought losing Ibaka and Gasol was a very big difference for them. Just their front line was completely tarnished compared to the last season, where the front line really was one of their core parts of their team with Siakam, obviously. So for them losing that, I thought that was huge for them, and it clearly was. And obviously, maybe it's just fatigue from them. Larry's getting older. Siakam wasn't great this year. That obviously played big factors too. But speaking of the Heat, I think they had a finals hangover. Obviously, they didn't win, but they obviously made the finals. The beginning of the season, they were terrible. Butler, he was injured. I think he maybe even had COVID or at least something with COVID. Bam wasn't great at the beginning. They had injuries too. But if you look at the last 30 games, this is the team that we expected throughout the whole season. And they're the scary. I would say they're the scariest team that's not one of the top 3 in the East. You do not want to play the Heat, and again, they're going to play the Bucks in that first round. It's going to be a really tough series for the Bucks. And Butler, if you look at him since he came back, again, I forget if it was from the injury or from a COVID thing. He's 22, 7-7, and that's for a majority of the season since then. So he's been as good as he could be ever since he came back from that. And Bam's played better. Shooting still isn't there, but defensively, again, he's probably first team, maybe not first team all defense because you have Gobert, but he's probably second team all defense. Definitely could have been first team all defense, but again, this is the Miami Heat team that we expected going into the season.
yeah, no, you said it well. I had them in my 6th seed. I think I probably would have had them slightly better off the bat and probably slightly worse as of recent. I expect it to be a little bit more level, but yeah, I mean, this team is a scary, very scary team. That's either probably the 4th or 3rd best team in the East, if not higher, maybe. I have them better than the Knicks, better than the Hawks. I don't want to play Jimmy Butler. I just think that's a scary team, and I don't think they're a threat to legitimately win the finals at all. But I mean, they're a scary team. Any team led by Jimmy Butler, they're just ferocious. Spoelstra's a great head coach. I mean, we've seen over there, he's just a great head coach. Bam's a guy that he's going to be 2nd or 3rd all team defense, all defense. Duncan Robinson can shoot the ball. Hero can obviously shoot the ball. Adding Oladipo on the trade deadline, it's definitely better than having Olynyk and Bradley in my mind for that Heat team.
Well, Oladipo's out for the year.
Yeah, but I mean, how many games did he play?
I only think he played a couple. I don't think he played that much.
Okay, well then never mind, I guess. But whatever. I mean, you get the point. This team is a scary team. They're probably, I mean, yeah, they're at worst the 4th best team in the East. So I think they're a pretty scary threat. I haven't really thought about who's going to win that first round matchup between the Bucks and the Heat, but I mean, I don't really know who to take because I kind of want the Bucks to win. I mean, I don't know if I want to, but they're a scary team. I mean, a Jimmy Butler team, they're scary.
No, definitely. And moving into the play-in teams in the East, we'll start with the Celtics as the 7 seed, 36-36. Clearly, not the season that they wanted, not the season that they hoped they were going to get. I guess just for my 7th seed, I did have the Wizards, and there still is a possibility they can get that 7th seed, obviously, with that 7-8 game happening tonight, actually. Again, we'll get into that matchups later, but clearly not the season that they wanted. Tatum was better than you probably would have hoped. I mean, he clearly turned himself into a top 15 guy right now, but he clearly will probably be a top 10 guy next year. At least that's the hope. Brown turned himself into a true number 2 on a championship caliber team. And then, Kemba, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the injuries, the knee, Marcus Smart, I mean, he's not going to be on this team next year. No way he's on this team next year. I thought the Fournier trade, I thought that was unfortunate because he had COVID literally as soon as he got into the team. And obviously that's clearly affected him somewhat after that. He just isn't the same player he was with the Magic. I think if that didn't happen, maybe they get a bolt of energy from him. They've lost 10 of the last 15 games after going on that West Coast trip. And I think they won 5 or 6 in a row. Now, people say that was kind of fake even when it was happening because they really weren't like winning those games. They were kind of locking themselves into those games. So who really knows? But still win 5 in a row on a West Coast trip. That's pretty impressive anyways. But yeah, something's clearly just wrong with this team. Obviously, you'd probably know more than I would being a Celtics fan. But yeah, this is a team where, everyone thought they'd be top 4, at least the 5 seed. And even if they win the 7 seed or the 8 seed, they're going to lose first round anyways. So definitely a really bad season for the Celtics.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, as far as my prediction on the Celtics, I mean, I had them at the 3. We talked about it. I think I nailed the head on Brown and Tatum. I just was completely wrong on the rest of the team. I wouldn't fire Stevens. I know people want to fire Stevens. I wouldn't fire Stevens. I don't really like Smart on this team. I would have traded him a while ago, I think. Kemba, I mean, he's stuck on this team. You're just gonna have to hope he gets better. If not, well, oh well, I guess. Fournier, you gave up like a second for him. It didn't work out. I mean, his first game, he was what? He had 0 points in 24 minutes, I want to say. So I mean, that kind of summarizes how he was. I mean, obviously it wasn't that bad, but yeah, I mean, COVID off the bat, he just wasn't great. And he was a guy that, he could have looked to get 20 plus mil on the open market this offseason, and maybe the Celtics look to re-sign him, but who knows what he gets now. But yeah, and as my 7 seed, let me see who I had as my 7 seed. I had the Pacers as my 7 seed. So yeah, I mean, I think the Pacers are what, the 9 seed, they're the 9 seed. So yeah. I was a little bit wrong, but close. I mean, playing tournament. So yeah.
Yeah. And moving on to the 8 seed, the Wizards did finish as the 8 seed, which is remarkable considering they were 17-32. They finished the season 34-38. Which is crazy. And I guess for my 8 seed, I had the Pacers there too. And like you said, they are the 9th seed, so pretty close. Again, they had the same record. The Wizards just had the tiebreaker. But speaking of the Wizards, I mean, beginning of the season, they're 3-12 to start the season. That's how they started off. They had COVID. They missed like 7 games in a row. They couldn't practice for 2 weeks. Westbrook had a torn quad to begin the season, which no one knew about until like February. Until he said it. Beal's obviously been amazing. If it wasn't for Curry just going on an absolute tear the last 20 to 25 games, Beal's winning the scoring title pretty easily. I mean, he was winning the entire season until Curry went on that tear. The trade acquisition of Daniel Gafford, if you've been watching the games, I mean, he's made a huge difference. He doesn't play a lot, which doesn't make sense because if he played more, he would average like over 2 blocks a game, 8 rebounds, 15, 16 points a game. That's just what he would do if he was playing more. He's clearly one of the better acquisitions that they made. But yeah, this is a team where injuries, COVID just clearly affected them. Bad coaching. Scott Brooks is not a good coach. He's definitely not going to be their coach for next season. His contract is expiring, so they're not going to bring him back no matter what they do in the playoffs if they do make the playoffs. But just a really impressive season considering where they started. I think before the season, people did have them higher, but if you were to tell me that this team was 3-12 and they were going to finish 34-38 and be an 8 seed on the last day of the season, they got that 8 seed. I don't think people would have expected that, honestly, even with Westbrook and Beal as your 2 best players.
I had the Magic as my 8 seed. The Wizards, yeah, I mean, I had them as my 10 seed, so pretty close, just not exactly there, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think Beal and Westbrook, they're great. I think Westbrook is probably slightly better than I expected him to be. on this Wizards team. They've played clearly great as of late. They were a team that I mean, halfway through the season, they weren't going to make the playoffs, and somehow they ended up as the 8 seed, which is cool. Um, but I mean, yeah, they're not an 8 seed that's going to win a series like win series is like the Lakers would or anything. So not too much to talk about. But yeah, I think the Wizards can build off this. If they can get a better head coach in there, maybe they can kind of fight for around a 5 seed-ish maybe next year if the East doesn't improve at all, which may happen. I'm not too, I mean, who knows? But yeah, I mean, this is an interesting team. I don't know that continuing with Westbrook and Beal is the best long-term play, but short-term wise, I guess they're going to be a competitive team. So
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, we'll talk about the playing tournament matchups right after this. But Beal is not 100%. He's coming off a hamstring injury, which we don't even know what that is. But he's probably like 70%. Honestly, if you saw that last game against the Hornets, he could barely get up and down the court. So that's going to be a big factor in that playing game. But moving on to the 9 seed, like you said earlier, it was the Pacers. I had the Hawks as my 9 seed. Clearly, they were better than that. They were the 5 seed. Again, that was mostly Nate McMillan and him coming in, which obviously I just couldn't have seen happening. So, I think they probably would have been better than a 9 seed, even with Lloyd Pierce, but it probably only would have been a 7 seed at the most, I would say. So I don't think I was that off. But speaking of the Pacers, I mean, obviously they messed up by firing McMillan, hiring Nate Bjorkensen. I think it's how you say it, Bjorkensen. I think they said they hired him because they liked his offense, but they never looked into his culture and his people ability, which is obviously the biggest reason. All those reports came out like 2 weeks ago that they may fire him at the end of the season because the locker room is so bad. Coaches are getting fights with players. Players don't seem to like him. There's a lot of just the locker room's clearly split up about the coach. They've had some bad injuries. Brogdon's been out, Turner's been out. TJ Warren's been out, I think, basically the whole season. Sabonis has played injured. Levert obviously traded for him. He had the kidney. He's come back. He's been really good, at least offensively. But this is a team that's just all over the place. And it's kind of where I expected them to be. Again, I had them as my 8 seed. They finished as the 9 seed. That's kind of what I thought. We did talk about before the season. They're probably trading Oladipo, which they did. They're probably going to trade Turner, which I thought they probably should have done, but they didn't. But again, that was clearly a trade candidate. But yeah, this was a team where they have a lot of good players, but it just never really worked out, I'd say. And it's definitely due to the coaching, I would say.
yeah, I thought the Pacers were going to be slightly better. Again, I had them as like my 7 seed, so it didn't completely work out. Sabonis is a guy though. I mean, in terms of if you want to talk about most underrated players in the NBA, he's up there at least. Obviously everything around him just wasn't good. I mean, but Turner's a guy who's in that top. I mean, he's not going to be in an all defense team, I don't think, because he's a center, but he's a great defensive player, and he's a guy that I wish got traded to the Celtics, and that was an easily executable trade. So, misplay by Ainge, but yeah, I mean, this Pacers team, I hope they fire Bjorkensen or whatever, Nate. So I hope they fire him. Uh, I'm not exactly sure who they'll bring in. I mean, I have no idea. I'm not looking at coaches on the market or whatever, but yeah. My 9 seed, I think I had the Hawks as well. Yeah, I had the Hawks as my 9 seed, but
Yeah, so
but
we were
yeah.
thinking the same thing about the Hawks, which again, if you have Lloyd Pierce the whole year, I think they're probably are that 8-9 seed, I would say. But moving on to the last seed in the East, it was Charlotte. Definitely a surprise. They were 33 and 39. I had the Magic there, and again, if the Magic don't tank basically, after the trade deadline, I think they are definitely in that 7 through 10 seeds. The Magic finished 21 and 51. Obviously, had to trade Fournier, Vucevic, Gordon, all those guys. But Charlotte, I mean, James Borrego is one of the better coaches in the NBA. Probably like no one really knows about him. He's in Charlotte, but he came from the Spurs. He's led that team to be pretty competitive last 2 years. They don't have great talent. I mean, their best player is probably Terry Rozier. LaMelo is probably their second or third best player, but he's not their best player. Definitely Rozier. You have Graham Bridges was really good this year. Miles Bridges, PJ Washington definitely improved. We'll see how much he actually does improve. I think he's kind of like a John Collins type. Can put up stats, but he's not. What role does he really play on a team? I think he's pretty similar to him. But yeah, definitely a team that overperformed and could have been the 8 seed. I mean, came out to the last game. They're rather going to be the 8 seed or the 10 seed, and they did lose, but they could have been the 8 seed, which would have been even more impressive, I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, I had the Wizards in my 10 seed. I didn't have the Hornets in the play-in tournament or in the playoffs in general. Lamelo was just and is better than I expected. I mean, he's either first or second in that rookie of the year. Um, we'll talk about it, I guess. But yeah, I mean the Hornets were much better than I thought they'd be. Even with that being said, they were still 33 and 39. So I don't know if they were necessarily much better than I thought they'd be. But if LaMelo didn't get hurt for a solid part of this year, they might be better than the 10 seed. They might be looking at, I mean, they might not even be in, I mean, they might be the 7 seed. So yeah.
Yeah, so that is it for the East and the West, through the 1 through 10 seeds, and I guess we'll get into our award predictions that we did, and then we'll talk about the play-in matchups, and we'll kind of just talk about it, and then pick a winner for each of the games, which are happening tonight, tomorrow, and then the loser, the 7-8 winner, the 9-10 will be on Thursday, and I don't know if I think they're one Thursday, one Friday, so we'll talk about it though. But for MVP. I think we had the same MVP. We both had Luca, I want to say,
Yeah.
and I think he was, definitely um, that was the guy to bet on, or maybe not the guy to bet on. He had the best odds, I should say, going into the season, based on the year he had last year. Another year of improvement. He still had a really good year. I think he was 29, 9-9, but just not it wasn't the same 29-9 you'd expect. It was the beginning of the season, 8-12. They finished really strong, but then you had Jokic and Embiid, obviously, and Curry even. So definitely not a bad pick, just didn't work out as you would have expected, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he had just a rough start to the year. He's still a top 7, maybe even top 5 guy in the MVP race, but yeah, just the rough start just didn't work well for him. I mean, who would? So I mean, we know who's going to win MVP most likely. It's most likely going to be Jokic, but if you have a ballot and you can vote, I mean, who are you voting for MVP for this year?
I'm voting Jokic. I probably would vote Embiid if Embiid didn't get injured. I'm picking Embiid. But since he did get injured, I mean, it has to be Jokic. I mean, just look at the stats anyways. I think he's 27, 11 rebounds, and 9 assists, I want to say. Obviously, he's led that team. He's been the best player on that team. To be a 4 seed, obviously, I mean, to be a 3 seed, I should say, without Murray for like 20 games is huge, anyways. The people saying Curry, I mean, I don't think he just can't win MVP, no matter the stats, no matter how much he carries the team. They're an 8 seed. Yeah, you can't be an 8 seed and win MVP. In my mind, I do look at record and seeding wise into MVP. Some people don't. Some people do. I think it is important, especially in the West. So yeah, I think Jokic is the clear MVP.
Yeah, I would vote for Jokic too. Curry would probably be my runner-up, if not third. I think Embiid belongs somewhere second or third, probably. Even if Embiid doesn't get injured, there's still a chance I still vote for Jokic. But yeah, Embiid's still in there. But yeah, I'd vote for Jokic. I think he had by far, or not by far, but I think he had probably the best year. He's probably the best center in the league. He definitely was last year in the playoffs. We'll see how the playoffs shake out this year. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, Jokic would be my MVP. I think he's going to win it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and for rookie of the year, again, I think we both have the same rookie of the year, Lamelo. He missed 20 games. He only played 51 games out of 72. So I don't know how much of a factor that plays because a lot of guys missed a lot of games this year. But Anthony Edwards did play all 72 games, did average 19 points. Obviously their team was terrible, so I still think that does play a factor. While the Hornets at least are in the play, and the Timberwolves are never even close. So I'd still go LaMelo, but I will be interested to see how the voting does turn out. If LaMelo wins, I think it'll be very close because of the games missed. But again, his team's in the playoffs. I think that does matter.
I'm going to Lamelo as well. I mean, I thought Edwards was going to get it once Lamelo initially got injured, and even like halfway through that injury, I just figured Edwards would be the guy. But if you're giving me the vote, I'm voting Lamelo. I just think Lamelo, he was the culture change in that Hornets, organization. I mean, Hornets. I mean, they were the old Bobcats. They were a team that nobody ever wanted. They were the laughing stock of the NBA, and suddenly, I mean, even just looking at that logo and looking at their jerseys, like I feel like my brain responds to the Hornets just so much differently now. They're a team that I want to watch. They're a team that is, on the up, and they used to not be that. I think LaMelo is basically the sole reason I view them differently now. And it's, Edwards has had a great year. He's second in the voting regardless, if not first still. But he's got a little bit of that empty stat sheet for me. I mean, the Timberwolves were absolutely horrible this year. So playing all 72 games to me doesn't really mean too much. But 19 points a game is still a lot regardless. It's got a little bit of that Andrew Wiggins feel where it's like he may be able to score, but he still has to change the game. He has to change his team and how his team plays at least a little bit. Something LaMelo did. It's something Zion did. It's something even Ja did, who was a last year's Rookie of the Year winner. So yeah, I would like to see Edwards change the game in that type of way. But again, he's just a rookie. It's really tough to see that, and LaMelo is he's an exception to the rookies where he's able to do that. So
Yeah. And for Defensive Player of the Year, I had Anthony Davis. I'm not sure who you had, but obviously Davis isn't going to win it. He missed 30 games. He's just obviously not going to win it. It's probably Simmons. I know people are trying to say Gobert, but I think it's Simmons. I think Simmons is the best perimeter defender in the league for his role on that team. He obviously Embiid's really good defensively, and they do have Matisse Thybulle too. But Simmons is really that best defender on that team. You could guard at point guards and shooting guards, ball handlers. You could also guard like a Kevin Durant if you really had to, a taller guy, a more guy on the block possibly even. So he can guard really any position 1 through 5. Honestly, I think he's Defensive Player of the Year, even though people do say Gobert.
yeah, to me, so I had Gobert, and I'm still gonna stick with Gobert. I just think, and I didn't even at the beginning of the year, I didn't even really want to pick Gobert. He was like the default guy. It was him or it was some random, and I was taking kind of too big of a risk. I was stuck thinking about this for a while. I was listening to I don't know if you know Through the Wire. It's King of the Fourth Quarter. It's his podcast, but they were kind of talking
Yeah.
about it. Gobert versus Simmons, and I thought about it for a while, and I think I'm sticking with Gobert. I think Gobert is going to win it, and I think I would pick him if I had a ballot as well. I think. I mean, Simmons being so versatile, that's what makes him so much. It makes him great, and I think he's a more exciting defensive player to watch because you can realistically put him on anybody you want, and that's you can legitimately put him on anybody you want, not just a guy that you say you can, like a Draymond or something. You can put him on the 1, you can put him on the 5. With that being said, I think the center in general is probably the most important defensive position. There's a reason that centers aren't centers defense on as a center is more valuable than offense on a center, and for the most part at least. So I think it's Gobert. I think statistically he's had the best defensive year out of his other 2 defensive player of the year years as well. It's tough to go against Gobert. If Simmons wins it though, I'm not going to be mad at all. I just think Gobert is so dominant in the paint, and there's a reason that there's a reason that Jazz team is so good, and I think Gobert probably has a lot to do with it. He's not a guy that's going to go guard the 1. Gobert can get exposed at times, but he's just so dominant in the paint. Like teams don't want to go in the paint against the Jazz because Gobert is just so good. And yeah, if Simmons wins it though, I'm not going to be mad. It'd be just because he's so elite at every single position. I just think Gobert is so good at what he does, and if you have a competent team around him, he just looks so great. And I think, I just think to me, Gobert is my defensive player of the year, but this is closer than any other award for me. It could go either way, and I wouldn't be really too surprised.
Yeah, and like you said, Gobert's won 2 of the last 3, so I wonder if maybe there's somewhat of a fatigue with him. So maybe that's why Simmons can win it, even if they're pretty similar. But yeah, I think that would be very close too. And moving on to most improved player, I mean, I had RJ Barrett. It's going to be his teammate Julius Randle. Obviously, I don't think there's any question on who it's going to be. He's averaging what's he averaging 24 points per game with 10 rebounds, 6 assists. He does everything for that team. They're a 4 seed in the East. Again, no one expected that to happen. His improvement, obviously, that's the point of the award. But from last year, he looked like a guy, stats wise, he could put up stats, but he's always going to be on a bad team. He's always going to have those turnovers that make no sense. Improved his 3-point shooting this year. The turnovers are way down. Again, the assists are up, the points are up, just his efficiency's up, the team-wise, everything. So it's clear cut. He's going to be most improved player, honestly.
Yeah, to me, yeah, I would agree. Julius Randle's my most improved player. It's a tough award to predict. I mean, it's so kind of
Yeah.
random. I think I had Jalen Brown. I guess we kind of both went with like, I mean, I guess bias picks. Jalen Brown, that if was a guy that I guess he could win it if there was absolutely nobody else to win the award. He's a guy that you could just throw in there, but it's gonna be Randall. There's not too much to say about it. He just improved so much. He started from, I talked about it. He's going to win the award. He deserves to. If I had a ballot, I'm voting for him as well. I don't know exactly if being unanimous most improved player even matters. I don't know the last person to do it. I don't even know if it's really a thing or anybody cares about it, but he'll probably do it. Maybe Jeremy Grant gets a vote or two. I mean, Grant improved a lot as well. He was a guy that I kind of thought the Nuggets were fine to let go of, and if I think you would have loved to have Jeremy Grant as the Nuggets this year, and he's a guy that if you had him, you might not have you might not have had to make the Gordon trade, or you might have made the Gordon trade and had Grant and Gordon, which would have been nice as well. So yeah, that's my like honorable mention for most improved.
Yeah. And I realized we actually never did this when we did our awards, but six man, we'll do it quickly. We never did it. It's going to be Jordan Clarkson, I'd like to say. I mean, for that Jazz team, he's the guy who comes off the bench and he's, their next scoring option behind Mitchell, at least a ball handler guy, I guess Conley too, but it's going to be Clarkson. There's a couple other guys in the league, but I think it's pretty clearly going to be Clarkson.
Yeah, Clarkson's gonna win. He's gonna win six man. I think if he didn't, maybe Ingles wins it. And they're on the same team, so kind of the same thing as kind of
Yeah.
last year with Harrell and why is the name not on my head right
Lou
now?
Will?
Harrell and Lou Will. Jeez, yeah. But yeah. I mean, I think Clarkson's he's a guy that from now on he's going to be in that six man of the year talk every single year. I'd assume. He fits that role really well. Um, I'm not exactly sure on his contract situation. I think the Jazz might have signed him to an extension. I'm not too sure on that, but it'll be interesting to see if he stays on the Jazz, if he can continue to do this. I'm not exactly sure. He might be a free agent this year, but yeah, I mean he's a six man of the year. I'm happy for him. It's nice that he was able to get out of that Cleveland situation and get on a successful team. And I'm interested to see how this Jazz team performs in the playoffs. They're not my favorite team, but a lot of players that I like. I like Gobert. I like Clarkson. I like Mitchell. I like Ingles. I like Quinn Snyder. So I'm interested to see how they play in the playoffs.
Yeah, and on Clarkson, he did sign a 4-year, $51 million
That's
extension
what
with the
yeah.
Jazz. Yeah, so he'll be a free agent in 2024 when he's 32. So it's kind of a little bit of a bargain, honestly, for the Jazz, the way he's been playing this year. But going on to Coach of the Year, I said this is the last award. I had Mike Malone, and again, that was thinking Nuggets would be the one seed in the West. I thought they'd have over 50 wins, be a clear cut number one seed, and that's why he'd be Coach of the Year. Obviously, that's not the case. It's going to be Monty Williams. Again, it could be Tibbs, but I think it's going to be Monty Williams. But yeah, I think you also had Mike Malone, I want to say too. So
Yeah, I mean, as it's the default pick is the one seed. I mean, if you've ever played 2K, if anybody's ever played 2K, that award is literally just given to the coach with the best record. That's not how it necessarily is in the NBA, but when you're predicting it, it's kind of easy to just go with the team that's the one seed that wouldn't, not I guess not everybody would have as the one seed. It was kind of Budenholzer wasn't going to win as the one seed in the East if he was there, even if he was the one seed. So yeah, I mean Malone was the default pick for a guy if you're picking the Nuggets as the one seed. Clearly, it probably won't be him. It'll be Monty Williams. Maybe Thibodeau wins it. I don't think so, but I think he has a puncher's chance at it. So yeah.
yeah, and we'll talk about our finals prediction when we get to the finals. So we won't say anything yet, but when we get to the finals, we will talk about that. But the last thing is we'll talk about the playing games. Quickly, we'll kind of just pick a winner, honestly, and talk about it. But tonight, Tuesday, it's the East. So at 6:30, it's the Hornets at the Pacers. I this is kind of a tough game. Both teams I feel like are kind of similar. I don't know if the Pacers have Brogdon for this game. It seems like they don't. And the Hornets, I don't think they have Gordon Hayward for this game also. They've both been out with injuries. And it doesn't seem like I don't know if this is updated or not, but it says Levert's not going to play too. So I don't know if that's true. I guess I probably should have looked at that before, but I'm going to go with the Hornets. Even with those injuries, anyways, I think the Hornets, they seem to blow leads at late in games, but I think Rozier uh, and Graham, their 3-point shooting, their team, if they get hot from three, it's kind of hard to beat them. Obviously, they're not great defensively, but if they get hot from three, it really is hard to stop them. And Rozier seems to make big shots at big times. So I'm kind of banking on that for this game.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Hornets as well. I just think that they're a super exciting team. I just think the Pacers look deflated. I'm not exactly sure if Brogdon's playing. Hayward is out. Miles Turner's out. TJ Warren's obviously he's out. Um, it says Domantas Sabonis is questionable. I think he'll play. I'm not exactly too sure
Yeah,
on it or not, but
he's gonna play. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I think the Hornets. I don't know that they're necessarily the better team. It's a one game series. Who knows what happens? But uh, yeah, I mean, I'll go with the Hornets. I think they're the more exciting team. I think they have more boomer bust potential. I think they just kind of have a higher ceiling just with LaMelo on that team. So yeah, I like the Hornets to win. The Hornets are currently 3-point underdogs ish. Um, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'll take the Hornets. If the Pacers win, I mean, honestly, I don't care about this game. It's the most irrelevant. It's the least irrelevant playing game to me. Yeah, I think to me it's probably the least relevant. At least in the East, it is. So yeah.
Yeah, and it looks like Brogdon's game time decision, but it seems like he probably will be out. And then Aaron Holiday, they said is questionable for the game, and nothing about Levert. So maybe that was just I don't know what that was. It does seem like he's going to play, and same as Sabonis. But for the 9 o'clock game, it's the Wizards at the Celtics. Again, this is a tough game because I think if Bradley Beal is 100% healthy, I think it's clearly you pick the Wizards in this game. But again, he's not healthy. He's not 100% healthy. So if they can if you put Smart, I think you could put Smart on Beal, and I think he could at least affect them defensively. And again, you can attack Beal on offense because again, he can't really move with that hamstring unless it's improved the last 2 days, which would be insane in 2 days to improve that much. I think that's going to be a problem for the Wizards, not only offensively, but also defensively. But even saying that, I think I'm going to pick the Wizards. The Celtics team, I think it'd be perfect for the season. Again, they still have a chance to possibly get in the playoffs, but I think it'd be perfect for them, the way the season's gone, to lose this game. I think Tatum's going to have a big game. They don't really have anyone to guard Tatum, but I think even besides that, with no Brown, obviously, I don't see, Kemba, I don't know how he's going to play this game. I mean, he's always hit or miss, so I'm expecting a miss, honestly, and I have the Wizards winning this game.
I think it'll probably come down to Kemba, to be honest. I expect if there's anything Tatum's done this year, I mean, he's done a lot, but he's been able to produce major games against subpar teams, and I would still label the Wizards as a subpar team, even though they've performed really well as of late. They don't really necessarily have a guy that's going to go on Tatum and shut him down or anything. They don't have they don't have like a Drew Holiday type of guy or a Ben Simmons type of guy. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the Celtics. I think Tatum goes off. I think Brown plays well. I think he probably has 20 and plays pretty solid defense, plays well in transition like he usually does. I think Kemba probably will play well. Maybe probably, I don't know. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. It's kind of a hit or miss, but I think it'll kind of ride on that. If Kemba can, even if he doesn't play well, if he can just hit the shots when they matter, obviously, but if he can hit a couple fourth quarter shots, if he can play well in the fourth quarter or in overtime, I think the Celtics win. If they lose, I think they win whatever out of the Hornets and Pacers. I think both teams would win. I think this is a close game though, but I think the Celtics pull it out, and I think the Wizards probably beat the Pacers and the Hornets. So yeah.
Yeah, and we'll do our next pick. The next teams are Thursday and Friday, so we'll record on Thursday. We'll do those picks then officially when we know the teams. But for the Wednesday game, for the next playing games for the West, Spurs Grizzlies at 7:30 in Memphis. Again, I think this is actually the most boring game. I think the Pacers Hornets is at least somewhat interesting. You have LaMelo, I guess. This game there's really no one. It's only Ja. I want to go Grizzlies, but I think I'm going to go Spurs. And I don't even know why I'm going with the Spurs. I just think I think Popovich is somehow going to lead this team to a victory. I think DeRozan has been pretty clutch for them. I'm not going to lie. Looking at some of their games, he's somewhat clutch for them. And the Grizzlies, they do seem to lack somewhat defensively. Or the Spurs are at least somewhat good defensively. I know that they do try defensively, but yeah, I think this does come down to if Ja can put up like 30 points and be somewhat efficient at it. And again, he's not a great shooter. Teams are just lacking off of him. So if he can hit outside shots, I think they definitely can win this game. But I'm gonna go with the Spurs in this game.
I'm gonna go with the Grizzlies. I just think they're the better team. I love Pop, but I don't know how far DeRozan can bring you. Maybe it's a 1 game series, so again, who knows? But I mean, yeah, I don't even really care about this game. What happens? What happens? I think they both lose to whoever loses that Warriors Lakers game. It'll be interesting. I think the Grizzlies though have more potential to beat the loser of that 7-8 seed game. So I'm gonna go with the Grizzlies. I think Ja is probably the best player in that series, and people may say DeRozan, but to me, I just think DeRozan is just not. But so yeah, I'll go with the Grizzlies. But if the Spurs win, I mean, it's a 1 game series and they're pretty close. They're both not great teams. So
Yeah. And for the last game, it is Warriors at Lakers at 10 o'clock. Yeah, I'm going to go Lakers. The only way I see the Warriors winning is if Steph can go for like 40 plus. Maybe it's like 10 threes or something like that, which obviously he can do at any time. But I think the Lakers game plan defensively is just as soon as you cross a half court, double him. I think it's a pretty simple game plan, honestly. Just don't let him get to his spot on the court. Obviously, he's a great off the ball mover. He moves without the ball great, going off screen. So it's going to be a problem. But I think you just have to double him basically anytime he touches the ball and make it if the other guys beat you, the other guys beat you. But I don't think you cannot let Curry beat you. And again, the Lakers are just the better team anyway, so they should win the game no matter what. Obviously, their front court size is way better than the Warriors' front court size, so I think they win the game anyways that way. But just don't let Curry beat you. That should be the game plan. So again, I'm going to Lakers over Warriors.
yeah, I've got I mean, I don't want to get too much into finals talk and all that stuff, but I'm actually going to take the Warriors to win this game. It's just going to be, I think Curry's going to go off, and I think Curry's going to have a night. I think Draymond's going to play defensive player of the year, quality defense. Offensively, he may not be there, but he'll knock down a couple shots. I expect Wiggins to fill up the stat sheet, probably nothing other than that. So yeah, but I think Curry goes off, and I think he probably I think he could have a 50-point game, and I think he might be able to go 7 for maybe even like 10 for 12 from 3 or something like that, and 10 for 14, and kind of just go off and have a game. So yeah, I'm gonna take the Warriors to win. That's definitely a flaming hot take there, but I'm gonna take the Warriors to win, and I still am gonna take the Lakers to win that next play-in game. So I mean, we'll talk about it then. So I kind of, but yeah, I mean, that's not. I mean, everybody knows that somebody would do that. That would take. Everybody's gonna take the Lakers if they lose to the Warriors. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a little recap. I'm going Hornets and Wizards, and then I'm going Spurs and Lakers.
I'm going Hornets and Celtics and Grizzlies and Warriors. So we're actually we're in pretty good disagreement on those playing games. I mean, they don't really have too much of an impact on the playoffs, but the Lakers and the Warriors game does for sure. So yeah.
Yeah. So again, we'll see how that plays out. Again, the East games are tonight, West games tomorrow, and then we'll get into the next playing games on Thursday when we record next. So I think that's it for this episode. Do you have anything else, Drew?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. So, but yeah, appreciate everybody who stayed to the end, I guess. We'll be back Thursday with playoff stuff. And by the way, actually, I will say my preseason finals pick was Celtics Lakers. I don't know if you have yours on your document or whatever, but I mean, we'll see how that works out. I won't talk about the finals, but that was my preseason finals prediction. So we'll see. There's still a chance. It's still alive. It's still an alive prediction. So I think you had Lakers Nets.
Yeah, I had Lakers Nets.
Yeah. I think that's looking a lot better than mine is. So
yeah, I think so too.
All right. But yeah, we'll be back Thursday. Feel free to check everything in the description. Yeah. I uploaded a TikTok recently, so feel free to follow that TikTok, by the way. So yeah, we'll be back Thursday.